My name is Elena Ward, and the first time I realized I had been erased, it did not arrive with shouting or slammed doors. It came as a quiet, polished absence. A niece's looping clip of clinking flutes and salt blue water slid across my phone, and beneath it a caption chirped about a beloved family tradition setting sail. The Harringtons do this every year, an annual yacht week dressed as heritage. I stared at the tiny video, at familiar faces arranged like pearls on a string, Sabrina's practiced smile, her husband, Ethan's approving nod, Opal at the head like a small, jeweled lighthouse, cousins and plus ones arranged with careful symmetry. Everyone shimmered there, ready to board. Everyone but me. My name had not been missed. It had been replaced. The realization landed with the kind of stillness that speaks louder than fury. The coffee at my elbow went lukewarm while the truth came into focus. This was not a scheduling oversight or a lost email. This was subtraction by design. I went looking for the thread anyway, the one called Harrington Heritage Voyagers, where I had once been included for exactly 2 seasons after marrying Graham. It was gone from my phone, quietly pruned like a dead branch no one wanted to discuss. A few minutes later, a message pinged from Sabrina. It was not meant for my eyes. You can always tell by the careless tone. A screenshot of cabin assignments labeled portside guests showed a name neatly struck through. Mine. Beside it, in a different line, sat a tidy confirmation for Zoe, Sabrina's yoga instructor and a woman who had once asked if I was Graham's assistant while I was carrying our luggage up her mother's front steps. A voice note followed, all breathy amusement. At least the energy aboard won't be so tight this year. I set the phone down, not because my hands were shaking, but because they were not. Composure can be a blade when it wants to be. That evening, over salmon that cooled faster than the conversation, I asked my husband the softest version of the hardest question. Did you know your family is planning the trip? He glanced up from market alerts and said his mother had mentioned it, that the list was not final. Am I on it? I asked, like I was picking a paint color. He frowned, confused by the gentleness. Of course. Why wouldn't you be? I smiled, a small thing to keep the air from hardening, and he promised to double-check in the way people promise things they do not intend to do. After he wandered off to highlights and scores, I washed dishes by hand, listening to the hush gather in the corners of the kitchen. Later in bed, I watched the ceiling fan carve the night into slow slices and cataloged every time I had pretended not to notice being positioned just outside the frame birthday gatherings I learned about from stories. Brunches that moved without me, conversations that stalled when I stepped into view. There is a moment when you stop wondering why they do not include you and start asking why you insist on arriving anyway. Before I switched off the lamp, I opened my journal and wrote one sentence in steady ink. Watch. Do not react yet. Morning brought what politeness often hides. Sabrina texted a note sugared with exclamation points, claiming she had just realized there might not be space for me, that the boat filled faster than expected, that she was so sorry, and hoped we could catch up after. It read like an apology until you noticed it offered no remedy. I set the phone face down and poured fresh coffee I did not drink. Around mid-morning, an email slid into my inbox from the charter company, efficient and devastating. Cancellation confirmed, cabin released. The request, it said in brisk type, had been submitted 3 days prior by Sabrina Harrington. I forwarded it to myself, printed a clean copy, and tucked it into a manila folder that once held tax and property notes. It would earn a new label before the week was out. When Graham came home, the shadows on the hardwood stretched like long quiets. I told him about the message, about the cancellation. He tried on a dozen reasonable explanations as if one might fit miscommunication, shifting plans, too many moving parts until I laid the email between us like a mirror. This is not an assumption, I said gently. This is a receipt. He did not argue then, he simply looked away, and in that small detour I heard the shape of what he was willing to ignore. I did not raise my voice. I opened my laptop instead and titled a new document, Things I Let Slide. The list arrived as if it had been waiting, being left off an email chain for a bridal shower, a holiday itinerary circulated twice without my name, a family photo where my shoulder made an accidental cameo before someone cropped it for balance, a brunch scheduled the day after I was told everyone needed a quiet month. By the time I stopped typing, my jaw ached in that familiar way, not from anger this time, but from clarity settling into place. Before midnight, another screenshot arrived from Tara, the assistant who typically booked Sabrina's caterers. Wrong recipient, right timing. Don't worry, she's not coming. I handled it, It read, 4 short sentences, and every one of them rang like a bell. I slid the printout into the same folder as the cancellation and closed it with a precision I reserve for things that matter. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and let the truth of it wash through me. This was never about a birth or a head count. It was about authorship. The yacht week, the so-called legacy, the table settings and head chairs and toasts were a stage, and I had been written out of the script with a smile. I had helped too by offering silence in moments that asked for a spine. I smoothed a palm over the folder's cardboard and whispered to the room what I had not yet said aloud to anyone else. You tried to hide me. Now you will watch me take my seat. I did not pack the way people pack for leisure. No sandals, no straw hat, no swim that pretends the ocean is a backdrop for photographs. I spread papers across the dining table like a cartographer, tracing borders I had let other people redraw for years. Wire confirmations, the purchase agreement, an email that used the word cancellation with surgical neatness, and that casual message from the assistant who said she had handled me. Each page slid into a protective sleeve, then into a folder that clicked shut with a clean little promise. I chose a simple navy dress with a high neckline and a light camel coat, practical flats that would not wobble on wet teak, and a small carry-on. When dawn met the street, the car pulled up. Graham watched from the kitchen doorway with a face that wanted to be neutral and failed. "You're going today?" he asked. "I am," I said, and the steadiness in my voice surprised even me. There was nothing left to discuss that a receipt could not. Newport met me in a low pearl haze that made metal railings glow and white hulls look like enamel. The marina smelled like salt and old money, the kind that will never bother to introduce itself. I rolled my suitcase along the boards, no squeal, no wobble, and let the early breeze iron my thoughts flat. There she was, Sabrina, near the gangway with a flute of something pale and expensive, posture perfect, hair pinned into place by intention. Opal stood just behind her, jeweled and unblinking, with Ethan hovering ready to agree with whatever narrative needed shoring up. Graham was close enough to be in the frame and far enough not to be implicated by proximity. When Sabrina saw me, her mouth paused around a word it could not land. The circle around her shifted almost imperceptibly, bodies canting to form a velvet rope that no one would have to name. I did not slow. I did not smile. I offered a single nod and kept moving, because choreography only works if you agree to dance. At the ramp, a woman in a navy blazer, head of crew by the way, she took in everything without staring, stepped aside. "Welcome aboard, Miss Ward," she said in a voice that carried just far enough. "Owner on deck." It was not loud, but it might as well have been a bell. The words rang down the dock and back, and I did not have to turn to see the crack run through Sabrina's polished composure. Inside, the lounge smelled like cut flowers and lemon oil, place cards lined up as if hierarchy were a kind of cutlery. Every bow, every bloom, every tiny decision announced Sabrina in absent neon. I passed it all and walked straight to the aft, where the sea's patience could braid itself into mine. When the engines shivered to life, the shoreline began to inch backward like a reluctant promise, and I let my fingers rest on the rail not to hold on, but to let go. I stayed in the main salon long enough to watch people recalibrate. There is a particular hush that follows an unexpected truth. It arrived like fog, soft but everywhere. Sabrina adjusted centerpieces with the concentration of a surgeon, as if symmetry could repair narrative. Ethan told a joke with laughter that sounded purchased. Opal consulted a schedule that did not require consulting. I sipped lemon water and crossed my legs, unhurried. Beside me sat Callista Hart, a journalist friend whose talent is listening until the truth tells on itself. She scrolled her phone like she was bored and murmured, "Give her 10 minutes to find a camera." She did not need 11. Sabrina climbed one level to catch the light, angling the lens to frame horizon, wake, and her face in the trifecta she relies on. "Hi, loves," she sang, syrup in human form. "Sharing our family tradition, the open water reminds you who you are and where you come from. Legacy, loyalty, love." The last word landed like a forged signature. Fate, or maybe just good operations, intervened. A crewman, oblivious to the stream or exquisitely aware, passed behind her and spoke in a working tone meant for colleagues, not cameras. "Glad to have you aboard again, Miss Ward," the owner. The lens did not pivot, but the angle of Sabrina's jaw did. For a heartbeat, the broadcast forgot itself. You could hear the engines, the small slap of water on hull, the tinny clink of a fork from somewhere out of frame. Then comments began to climb the screen like ivy. "Wait, she owns it? Tell us the story, Miss Ward. That shifted fast. Sabrina stabbed at the screen, killed the feed, and walked off with the grace of someone wearing a dress made of glass. Callista leaned toward my shoulder and whispered, "That clip will have a second life by dinner." It did not take dinner. It took 10 minutes. Sabrina found me near the port hallway where light ran along the floor in a bright stripe. "You orchestrated that," she hissed, voice low enough to pass for composure. The announcement. I set my glass down, met her gaze, and marveled at how quiet the room had become in order to hear us better. "I orchestrated nothing," I said. "A professional did his job and used the correct noun." "You don't belong here," she said, grasping for the script that had served her for years. I stood so slowly the air had time to rearrange itself. "That's the difference between us," I said. "I do not need to belong. I purchased my place." The sentence landed without theatrics, and for the first time since I had met her, Sabrina looked small inside a space she had curated to fit herself exactly. Back in my cabin, I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the folder. My fingers skimmed signatures, dates, the clean spine of a contract that could outlast a grudge. I was not angry anymore. Anger had burned off like morning mist. What remained was calibration, the kind of balance you feel in your ankles when a boat settles into a true line. I closed the folder, stood, and returned to the salon. Dessert arrived in glass cups that trembled with panna cotta, citrus dusting the top like confetti. The light hit the crystal and threw little handfuls of stars against the ceiling. Sabrina rose to toast with a voice smoothed by years of practicing the right tone. She thanked everyone who upheld the family's name, who understood legacy, who added not subtracted phrases arranged like fine flatware around a single insinuation. I let the words align themselves in the hush, and then I set my leather folder on the table so gently it made no sound at all. I did not clear my throat or raise my glass. I simply opened the folder and laid a single page in the center of the linen like a quiet compass. Letterhead at the top, time stamped near the margin, a streak of yellow ink catching the sentence that mattered. "This is a transcription from a video call last month," I said, measuring every syllable. "Between Sabrina and the Harrington Council." I lowered a fingertip to the highlighted line and read it without altering a word. "She's not blood. She shouldn't own a family asset. No one reached for dessert." Crystal stopped chiming. You could hear the faint mechanical breath of the air system and the ocean's slow hand against the hull. Opal's mouth tightened, a small seam running through lipstick that used to be unflappable. Ethan's eyes went everywhere at once in search of a script. Graham looked only at me and found nowhere else to put his gaze. I slid a second page onto the table, then a third, each one arriving with the gentleness I denied my anger. "Initial transfer," I said, tapping the wire confirmation. "Down payment," I added, indicating the figure in words. "Purchase agreement," I finished, letting my name in the first position speak for itself. "This is not performance. It is provenance." Sabrina inhaled through her nose, the single-note sound of someone trying to summon dignity faster than truth travels. "I was protecting our family," she said, reaching for the only shield she knows. "Traditions matter, structures matter. I didn't think—" "You thought I would stay grateful and quiet," I replied, not unkindly. "And for a long time I did." Graham found his voice and lost it in the same second. "I did not know about this call," he said, throat rough. "Why would you say that, Sabrina?" She stared at the page as if ink could rearrange under pressure. A cousin coughed into a napkin. A chair leg creaked against teak. Somewhere at the far end, a man named Harold, a friend of the family who has never performed for an audience, said clear as a bell, "Let her finish." "I have let things slide," I continued, not raising my tone so the words had to carry on their own merit. Small omissions, tidy crop marks, invitations that never arrived, and stories that did. I let them slide because peace felt valuable. But peace without truth is just quiet. I gathered the sheets back into a neat stack, edges aligned. "This is not a plea for inclusion," I said. "This is a request for accuracy." Eyes moved, but no one stood. Opal touched the stem of her glass and did not lift it. Ethan drew a breath he could not use. Sabrina sank into her chair inch by inch, each vertebra conceding what her mouth refused to name. I looked once around the table, not to count allies, but to memorize the moment I stopped apologizing for evidence. "If you want a story you can defend," I said, "begin with the records." There was no clatter when I left, only the soft, patient rhythm of the sea. I stepped out to the deck where the night had assembled itself without asking our permission. The wake stitched a silver seam in the black water, and the wind lifted my hair in a way that felt less like chaos and more like release. As I passed the lower cabins, a sliver of light drew a thin rectangle across the corridor carpet. A voice leaked through low, heated, not for public consumption. She took it. It was always meant to be mine. The words did not wound. They confirmed. I kept walking. The bow cut forward. The past did not. Back in our cabin, Graham stood with his hands in his pockets, looking at the built-in dresser as if it might offer counsel. He started with a sentence I had never heard from him in this tone. "I think I always knew," he said. Not the extent, but the shape. The remarks that landed and we pretended were jokes. The seating plans that somehow never had space. I told myself keeping the peace was loyalty. He swallowed hard, eyes glassing but not breaking. It was cowardice dressed up as diplomacy. I should have stood between you and the story they kept writing. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the admission find a place to rest. "You let it run a long time," I said, not sharpening it, not dulling it. He nodded once, as if signing a document only he could read. I did. We did not reach for a neat ending. We let the truth sit with us like a third presence until the room learned its new shape. Dawn was gray and clean. I took my coffee to the lounge and opened a notebook, not to strategize, but to give the silence a page. People drifted in and out, gravity altered by what had been said. Maddie, a cousin who has always been kind in small ways that matter, hovered near the fruit platter and said without quite meeting my eyes, "I should have spoken up a long time ago." Aunt Lorna, who once told me I was too serious for my age, set an extra spoon beside my saucer and squeezed my shoulder with a thumb. Ron, Ethan's older brother, walked by and murmured, "Saw it building. Did not expect it to crack clean." None of it was apology. All of it was recognition. It steadied more than applause ever could. That night I lay awake, staring into the quiet with my hands folded over the folder on my stomach like a book. I did not think about Sabrina. I thought about the earlier version of me who sanded her corners to fit smaller spaces, who translated slights into misunderstandings, who auditioned for rooms that had already cast the roles. I mourned her without pity. She had kept me afloat until I learned to swim in my own direction. Around 3 o'clock I sat up, opened the folder, and let my eyes fall over signatures and dates not to relive, but to remember. Evidence used to mean battle. Now it meant peace. I closed the cover and slept hard for the first time in a long time. Morning arrived wrapped in a soft gray hush. Breakfast appeared as if by choreography, eggs barely set, toast still warm, fruit that looked like it had been arranged by a patient hand, but conversation had lost its costume. People moved more slowly, as if words weighed something now. I sat at the end of the table with both palms bracketing a mug, not triumphant, simply present, and that alone felt like a new architecture. Around mid-morning, my phone vibrated. I stepped onto the lower deck where the air tasted like salt and metal, and answered, "Marjorie, it's Ronald." His cadence held that measured care attorneys reserve for truths everyone already knows but no one has said aloud. "I want to apologize for even entertaining the draft language that would have diluted your stake," he said. "I knew it would never stand. I should have shut it down immediately." I let the silence carry my reply. It continued, Hentler. "On paper and in practice, you are the rightful owner." He did not add therefore or however. He did not need to. Upstairs, I found Callista in the lounge, laptop open, the glow turning her irises to coin. Her fingers moved with the confidence of somebody taking dictation from the present tense. "I posted it," she said without preface. She turned the screen toward me. The headline was a clean blade. The woman they tried to edit out. The subhead braided 3 threads: silence, ownership, and the decision to stand upright. My name sat in the byline like it had been waiting for a chair. "Do you want it down?" she asked. "No," I said, surprised by how calm the word felt in my mouth. Shares climbed in real time. Comments arrived not in a clamor but in waves. Recognitions, echoes, women who had been cropped at the shoulder of their own photographs and were tired of pretending the framing was accidental. "This isn't revenge," I said. "It's record keeping." Callista smiled the kind of smile you make when a line lands exactly where it belongs. Then let the record reflect. Later that afternoon, I stood at the stern with the wind laying a soft hand along my jaw. Graham found me there, the horizon written across his face like a map he had finally learned how to read. "I've been thinking," he said, voice level but unguarded. About what I said and what I didn't say, for a long time. I let the water speak for both of us until he continued. I did not protect you when it counted. I spoke to Ronald. We can restructure the registration, make it solely yours. You earned it 10 times over. I studied him not to measure his offer but to weigh the man making it. This was never about a title, I said. It was about being seen without footnotes. He nodded, receiving the boundary rather than negotiating it. He did not press, and that restraint meant more than any transfer of paper. By dusk, the sky loosened its grip and bled light in long amber seams across the water. People had resumed the theater of normal cards shuffled, glasses refilled, a playlist finding the safest songs, but the script read differently now. Sabrina kept to interior rooms, occupying chairs with the discipline of someone who has lost command of the stage and is trying to memorize the backstage instead. Opal crossed my path once, pearls steady, voice low. I did not see it, she said, a confession pared to bone. Now I do. Recognition, not absolution. It was enough. I answered with a single nod. Nothing wasted and nothing owed. That night, I returned to the top deck alone. The boat breathed in its slow, mechanical way, a metronome for a steadiness I had not felt in years. I did not rehearse comebacks. I did not write mental closing statements for trials that would never be called. I stood there barefoot with a forgotten cup cooling at the rail and let a simple truth settle where anxiety had lived. I was done auditioning for a part that was mine on arrival. The sea kept its counsel. I kept mine. When sleep came, it came heavy. No looping arguments, no inventory of slights, no editing the day into kinder angles. I woke before sunup and watched the thin silver edge of morning draw itself along the horizon. In the glass door, I caught my reflection and did not wince. No performance, no tight smile. Just a woman who had traded weather for climate and decided to stay. The ship turned for land in the pale hours before sunrise, the water below a soft sheet of pewter, the sky drawing a faint seam of light where night surrendered without drama. I stood on the upper deck with a sweater pulled around my shoulders and felt nothing I could mistake for triumph. What arrived instead was steadiness, a climate replacing weather. When I caught my reflection in the glass, I did not see a performer or a defendant. I saw a woman finished with auditioning for rooms that had already been measured without her in mind. I went inside and packed slowly, not out of reluctance, but out of regard for the quiet that had finally learned my name. Home received me the way an old friend listens without commentary. The creak near the pantry was still there, the stack of magazines by the couch still aspirational, the kitchen still smelling faintly of coffee even when the pot was empty. Nothing had moved, but everything felt rearranged. I set my suitcase in the hallway and allowed the stillness to expand. No alerts, no performance summaries, no new speeches from Sabrina. For the first time in years, my thumbs did not anticipate an apology that would never arrive. I unpacked the way you file a case closed. Documents first, then close, then the last of the anger I had folded too neatly for too long. By midweek, while reorganizing a drawer in the credenza, I found a slip of paper wedged between a long-forgotten envelope and a grocery list. The handwriting was unmistakable, blocky, careful, my father's. Do not fight for a seat. Build your own table. I could not remember when he had written it, but I knew why he had. I sat with that sentence, the way you sit with a lighthouse meant not to be visited, but to be seen. The next morning, my phone rang with a name that startled me into a genuine smile. Maya, Sabrina's niece, 23 and exacting. A quiet observer with an engine under the hood. I hope I am not crossing a line, she said, voice steady and quick. I have been thinking about the trip. About you. I let the silence make space. You are the only person in the family who built something from the ground up, she continued. Not endowed, not inherited, made. I am applying to a business mentorship and I wondered, could you read my application? The answer rose without debate. Yes, I said. Send it. Legacy, I realized, does not need a brass plaque. Often it begins with a single invitation to be taken seriously. A week later, I hosted Sunday brunch, the opposite of curated. No florals labored into meaning, no speeches walk-tested for resonance, no seating chart disguised as caste system. Just eggs and toast, strawberries halved in a bowl that did not match anything else, sunlight falling across a table. I had refinished myself until the wood remembered it was alive. Graham made coffee and did not attempt a toast. Callista brought lemon bars and a notebook she did not open. Ronald arrived with his wife and a look on his face that said, I am here as a friend, not as counsel. I did not try to fill the room with every person who shared a surname. I invited those who knew how to converse without stage directions. Not everyone needs to come, I told Graham as he set down the mugs. Only the ones who belong by spirit, not blood. He nodded and kissed my temple in a way that felt less like apology and more like alignment. Between washing a pan and drying a plate, I caught myself wondering what I would say if Sabrina ever offered a real apology. Perhaps she would reference pressure or tradition or that brittle notion of safeguarding the family name. I rehearsed the only answer I would allow myself, spoken privately and once. I can forgive and still decline the performance. Some peace is not negotiated, it is claimed. The table we sat around that afternoon was not the heavy mahogany heirloom from Opal's house, nor the glossy showpiece Sabrina had once posed beside for a magazine. It was mine, bought secondhand and sanded on evenings when I needed to turn friction into finish. People talked without checking angles, laughter wandered without asking permission, and no one asked for a camera. I looked at the faces around me and recognized the difference between attendance and presence. This seat had not been granted. I had built it. Later, when the house settled into the hum of ordinary time, Graham found me shelving books and stood there with his hands useless in the best way. "Thank you for not walking," he said, an unadorned sentence that meant more than any contract revision. "I am not here because it is easy," I replied. "I am here because change is not a letter we send, it is a room we live in." He did not reach for immediate absolution, and I did not offer it. We let the practice of staying begin by being quiet in the same place. In the days that followed, I reviewed Maya's application and wrote in the margins with the care someone once should have taken with me. She revised, resubmitted, and then called to say she was in. The celebration was not champagne on a yacht. It was a late afternoon walk and a pair of shoes that did not blister. I thought about that sentence in my father's hand and realized I had misread it for years. The instruction was not to reject other tables out of pride. It was to stop shrinking at them out of fear. Build your own table, and you will know when to sit at someone else's without asking permission first. I had once believed acknowledgement from that family would complete some unfinished sentence in me. What I learned instead was this: respect lands differently when it is not something you chase, but something you carry. To anyone who has been trimmed out of the frame and told the crop was incidental, I see you. Maybe your battleground is not a boat. Maybe it is a boardroom, a break room, a kitchen, a lab, a ward, a studio, a side office with bad light. Maybe the exclusions arrive as silence instead of slurs. The method varies, the math does not. You do not owe anyone a lifelong audition. You owe yourself a chair you can sit in without bracing for impact. So let me leave you here, not with a benediction, but with an invitation. Have you ever been made to feel like an outsider in your own story? Have you ever withheld your success because you knew the room would discount it? Or swallowed your pain because the script required a pleasant character? Tell me where you are listening from. Tell me which sentence in your life you are ready to finish without permission. And if this chapter did not meet you where you are, I still want to hear why. The record is richer when it holds every voice, not just the loudest ones. If this moved you, if it steadied you, or simply made you pause before shrinking again, come back for the next chapter. I cannot promise ease, I can promise truth.